My name is Isla Rivers, and I swore I'd never come back to this place. Not after everything. Not after him. Not after what I left behind, but grief has a way of pulling you back to places you once ran from, and I guess I ran out of places to hide. The truck crunched over the gravel driveway like it was protesting my return. Dust curled in the rearview mirror, swallowing the road behind me until all that was left was silence, and the ranch. Rivers Hollow IT hadn't changed much. The white fencing had faded to gray. The barn roof was sagging. Weeds had overtaken the path leading to the paddocks. The house loomed behind it all like a sleeping ghost, shuddered and stilled. I killed the engine. The silence hit me harder than I expected. No birds. No breeze. Just memory. I didn't cry when I got the call. Your grandfather passed away last night, the voice had said. And I'd simply replied, okay. It wasn't that I didn't love him. I did, but grief wasn't new to me. It had been shadowing me for years. Since Dad left. Since Mom stopped speaking. Since I walked away from the only living thing that had ever looked me in the eye and made me feel something. Zephyr. I hadn't said his name aloud in years. Not because I'd forgotten, but because remembering hurt too much. He was just a foal when Grandpa gave him to me for my 16th birthday. Born wild like you, he said. Let's see who tames who. We were inseparable. Until I left, until everything went wrong, until I stopped believing I deserved the kind of bond he offered me, unconditional, wordless, terrifyingly honest. The barn door creaked as I pushed it open, a cascade of dust falling from the beams above. The air inside was thick with the scent of hay, wood, and time, and then, a sound. A snort, low. Familiar, and there he was, standing at the far end of the stall. Half lit by the shaft of evening light slicing through the broken slats in the roof. Zephyr. I stopped breathing. He was older now. His mane had grown wild, his coat dusted with the soft gray of age. But he was still unmistakable, sleek, powerful. Built like wind given shape, and he was staring at me, still. Quiet. Sharp-eyed, like he'd been waiting. Damn, my throat closed. I didn't think you'd still be here, I whispered, stepping forward. He didn't move, didn't blink. He just watched, and suddenly, I wasn't 32 anymore. I was 16, barefoot in the barn, laughing as he nibbled my braid. I was 17, crying into his mane after my first heartbreak. I was 19. Running down the same gravel road with a suitcase in my hand, refusing to look back. I swallowed. I'm sorry, I said, barely louder than a breath. Still, he didn't move, but his ears twitched. A small thing, but to me, it felt like forgiveness. The old stall door creaked as I pushed it open. He stepped back once, then forward. We met in the middle. I lifted a shaky hand. May I? No answer, of course, just that quiet weight in the air. So I touched him just behind the ear, and something in me broke open. He pressed his head gently into my shoulder, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands found his mane, tangled and thick, but somehow still soft. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in over a year, I let myself feel something. The sun dipped lower behind the hills as I stood there, forehead against Zephyr's neck, heart pounding like I'd just run across the valley. Nobody was around and no people. No sounds, just me, and my horse, and the kind of silence that doesn't suffocate, but holds you. I stayed in the barn until the last light vanished from the doorway. When I finally turned to go, he followed. I stopped in the barnyard, surprised. He stopped, 2.5 feet behind me. Watching, I almost laughed. Still tracking me, huh? He didn't blink. Didn't move, but he stayed. I slept in the ranch house that night, barely. The electricity still worked, but barely. The walls groaned with old memories. I wrapped myself in one of Grandpa's blankets and stared at the ceiling. Until dawn. My dreams were filled with hooves and thunder and the sound of someone calling my name in the dark. When I stepped outside the next morning, Zephyr was there, waiting. I walked toward him slowly. I'm not staying, I said, as if that would matter. He just blinked, tail swishing. I came to clean up. Sell the place. That's all. He took a step forward. I hesitated. You can't change my mind. Another step. My voice cracked. Please don't try. He stopped, so close now I could see the golden flecks in his eyes. The ones I used to swear looked like firelight, and in that moment, I realized something he knew. He'd always known, not words. Not reasons, but something deeper, something alive. Nobody was around, except my horse, and somehow he did this. He saw me, right down to the part I'd buried beneath city noise and broken dreams and grief I'd never spoken aloud, and I knew this wasn't going to be a visit, not anymore. I didn't sleep much again. Every creak of the old house sounded like a memory trying to get in. I stared at the ceiling for hours, wrapped in one of Grandpa's thick wool blankets, as dust spun in the moonlight and the silence pressed down like a weight I couldn't push off. By morning, I had made up my mind I would leave. I didn't care that the air smelled like wild sage again. I didn't care that the morning light fell through the trees just like it used to when I was a girl. I couldn't stay. If I stayed, I'd feel it all, and I wasn't strong enough for that. Not yet. I packed fast, just the overnight bag. I hadn't even brought a suitcase. I tossed in my keys, my phone charger, a granola bar I hadn't eaten. I didn't look around the room. Didn't say goodbye to the walls. If I looked back, I'd stop, and I couldn't stop. I opened the front door, blinked against the sunlight, and froze. Zephyr was standing in the driveway, right in front of my truck, not grazing, not curious, just standing still, alert, waiting right in front of the hood. I took a cautious step toward him. Move, boy. He didn't flinch. Come on, I said, forcing a lighter tone. I need to go. He blinked, ears twitching, but stayed exactly where he was, dead center between me and the road. I narrowed my eyes. Seriously? Another step forward. He didn't rear, didn't snort, just lowered his head, like he was grounding himself, blocking me. My voice rose. This isn't funny. I grabbed the keys, unlocked the truck, the doors beeped. He didn't move. I opened the driver's side and climbed in, praying he'd get startled by the sound of the engine. He didn't. I started the ignition. The truck rumbled to life. Zephyr took a step closer, right up to the grill, and stood. I turned it off, slammed the door, stormed toward him. Move. You're a horse, not a wall. He didn't even blink. I shoved his shoulder lightly. A move. Nothing, just silence, just him looking at me like he knew exactly what I was running from and wouldn't let me run this time. I sank down onto the porch steps, suddenly shaking. I buried my face in my hands and whispered, "Why won't you let me leave?" There was no answer, but there was presence. Zephyr stayed in place, a black statue against the blue sky, unwavering, and somewhere inside me I broke, not loudly. Just a quiet fracture. A release. Tears came without warning, for my grandfather. For the years I'd wasted pretending I didn't miss this land. For the version of myself I'd abandoned, and Zephyr just stood there, like a sentinel. Like a wall I didn't know I needed. Eventually, I wiped my face. He was still there, still blocking me, and I realized something. He didn't want me to leave, not because I owed the ranch anything, but because he wasn't finished with me. The storm rolled in around sunset, fast. Sudden, the kind of storm that doesn't knock politely, but crashes in like it owns the sky. I had just managed to throw a tarp over the pile of half-rotten hay bales when the first crack of thunder split the air. Zephyr was still out in the yard. I ran toward him, heart pounding. Come on. I shouted over the wind. He didn't move. I reached for his halter, tugging gently. Let's go, come on, the barn. He snorted, flicked his ears, and finally began to trot beside me, hoofs thudding against the earth. We made it inside just as the sky split open and the rain poured in thick sheets. The barn was dark, save for the streaks of lightning slicing through the slats in the walls. Zephyr stood in the center aisle, snorting, head raised, alert but calm. I leaned against the wooden post, soaked through, gasping, "Guess I'm staying," I muttered. He turned his head toward me, and slowly walked closer. He nudged my shoulder just once, and that was it. That was all it took. I slid down onto the straw-covered floor and let the storm rage outside. He lowered himself beside me, massive and warm and alive, and in the darkness of that old barn, with thunder rolling and rain pounding the roof like a war drum, I leaned against him. It wasn't the kind of moment you can plan for. Or even explain, but I think, if you've ever loved an animal the way I loved Zephyr, you'd understand. The silence between us said everything. I'm here. I see you. And I'm not going anywhere. We stayed like that for hours, just me and my horse, nobody else around, and still, he did this. He reminded me what safety feels like, not in walls, not in escape, but in being known. By the time the storm faded, my heartbeat had slowed. I was still soaked, still shaken, but I wasn't afraid anymore, and I didn't want to leave. Not yet, I whispered. You knew, didn't you? Zephyr's ears flicked. You knew I wasn't ready to go. He breathed out, warm against my face, and I smiled, the first real one in months. The morning after the storm smelled like rebirth. Everything was damp, soft, and glowing, mud rising from beneath the grass, sunlight pressing through the clouds like an apology. I stood barefoot on the porch steps with a chipped mug in hand, sipping coffee that tasted more like ash than comfort, but I didn't mind, because Zephyr was grazing nearby, and I spent the morning cleaning out the barn. The old hay bales were mostly useless, but I found a few rusted tools I remembered from childhood. Grandpa's initials were still carved into the handle of the feed shovel. I ran my fingers across them, and something behind my ribs tensed, then softened up. By noon, the clouds were gone, the sun fully awake, and Zephyr was waiting by the gate. And I knew that looked. He wanted to go. The forest behind River's Hollow was never technically part of the property, but Grandpa always said the trees didn't care about fences. He used to take me riding there in the evenings, back when the world made sense, and my biggest worry was whether Zephyr would spook at a squirrel. Back when everything still felt possible. I saddled him slowly. He stood still, patient, his body warm under my hands. You sure you remember the trail? I asked, scratching behind his ear. His tail flicked once. I took that as a yes. The path was overgrown in places, and I had to duck more than once as low branches clawed at my hair. Zephyr moved with quiet confidence, hooves soft against the damp earth, ears forward. He remembered this trail better than I did. I let him lead. Birdsong returned overhead. The wind moved gently through the leaves. For a while, I let myself believe I was just a girl again, riding with no destination, and then something shifted. I don't know what triggered it. Maybe it was the shape of the trees, or the smell of wet bark, or the angle of sunlight breaking through the canopy, but suddenly, my chest tightened, and I couldn't breathe. Panic attacks are like earthquakes. They don't announce themselves, they just happen, and when they hit, the world tilts. My fingers trembled on the reins. Zephyr stopped immediately. He felt it. Of course he did. My throat closed. My vision blurred. I slid off the saddle before I collapsed. My knees hit the ground hard, the forest tilting sideways. My lungs refused to fill. I curled forward, shaking. The trees were too tall. The light was too sharp. The world was too much. I didn't say anything. I couldn't, but Zephyr moved, slowly, deliberately. He stepped beside me and lowered his head until his forehead touched mine. He stayed like that, breathing, just breathing and out, and eventually I followed. My breath returned, first in gasps, then in full, then in stillness. When I opened my eyes, he was watching me, not worried, not panicked, just present, unmoving, unflinching, like he'd done this before. My voice cracked. How did you know? He blinked slowly. I pressed my hand to his nose, grounding myself in his warmth. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was kind. After a while, I stood. He stood with me, and then, without a sound, he turned, walked forward, and I followed. We moved deeper into the woods. The path twisted through moss and stone, past trees older than my grief. Zephyr walked with purpose now, tail swaying, ears steady, like he was leading me somewhere I'd forgotten, somewhere he hadn't. And then we reached it, the grove. I didn't recognize it at first, not until I saw the rock formation, the one that looked like a sleeping horse. The one Grandpa always said was nature's signature. I froze. I know this place, I whispered. Zephyr stopped, waited. I stepped into the clearing. It was smaller than I remembered. Overgrown, faded, but it was real. This was the place Grandpa had brought me the day I first rode Zephyr bareback, the day I told him I wanted to leave this place someday, and the day he said, just don't leave yourself behind when you do. I sank onto the rock and ran my fingers along its mossy edge, and I cried, for the girl who had left, for the man who had stayed behind, for the horse who had remembered. Zephyr walked over and stood beside me. He didn't nudge, didn't demand, just stood. So I talked, not out loud, not entirely, just quietly. To the air, to the trees, to him, about the jobs I hated, the relationships that left more silence than love, the way I forgot how to breathe until I came back here, and the strange thing? He listened, every flick of his ear, every slow breath, every moment he didn't walk away. It mattered, more than any advice, any therapy, any self-help book. This was real, this was honest. Eventually, the sun began to shift. Zephyr turned his head toward the trail. I smiled. Okay, I said, wiping my face. Let's go home. He waited until I stood, and then we walked together, not rushed, not lost, just walking. Nobody was around, except my horse, and he led me to the part of myself I'd forgotten how to find. We were almost home. I could see the distant outline of the barn roof between the trees, its rust-red color, softened by the haze of late afternoon. The air smelled like pine needles and dust, and my legs ached from the hours in the saddle. Zephyr moved with calm certainty beneath me, his gait steady, sure-footed, as if this land still spoke to him in ways I could never fully understand, and for a moment, I let myself relax. Too soon. The slope came out of nowhere. 1 minute we were navigating a narrow trail with dappled sunlight flickering through the canopy, and the next, my boot slipped from the stirrup. I leaned the wrong way. My balance tipped. The world spun. I fell. It wasn't graceful. My hip hit the rocky earth hard, my elbow scraping along the forest floor as I slid down a shallow incline, dust and leaves clinging to my clothes like bruises. Pain sparked through my ribs. My head thudded softly against a patch of moss, and I lay there, winded. Silence. For a few seconds, all I could hear was my heartbeat pounding in my ears, then, a heavy exhale. I turned my head, slowly, stiffly. Zephyr was standing just above me on the trail, still watching, not panicked, not retreating. I blinked. "I'm fine," I mumbled, though I wasn't sure it was true. My ankle throbbed. My wrist burned. There was something wet on my arm, blood or sap, I couldn't tell. I tried to sit up and nearly cried out. Zephyr took one careful step forward. I reached toward him, and he inched closer, his eyes locked onto mine, unblinking. "You're not gonna leave me here, are you?" I whispered. He didn't. Instead, he did something I didn't expect. He lowered his body, slowly, awkwardly, into a crouch, almost like he was kneeling beside me. His huge frame shifted, muscles twitching, breath loud in the silence of the trees, and then, he nudged my side with his muzzle, gently, insistently. I let out a shaky laugh. "You trying to help me up?" He nudged again. I didn't move, and not yet. Pain still flared with every breath, but it was dulling. "Just a bruise, maybe. Nothing broken." I rolled onto my side with effort, using my good hand to prop myself up. Zephyr stayed where he was, shoulder to shoulder with me now. I leaned against him. The warmth of his body was grounding, solid, real, everything else of the sting, the fear, the pressure behind my eyes, faded just a little. I pressed my forehead against his neck and exhaled. "I'm okay," I murmured. "I just fell." He snorted softly, almost like he didn't believe me. We sat there like that for a while, I in the quiet. No traffic. No voices. No expectations, just forest and breath and the silent comfort of a horse that refused to walk away. Eventually, I stood, slowly, carefully. He rose with me, graceful despite his size, his eyes never leaving my face. I tried to take a step. Pain shot up my ankle. I winced and stumbled. Zephyr moved instantly, pressing his body into mine, giving me something to lean on. We weren't far from the ranch, but it took twice as long to walk back. I limped. He matched my pace every time I faltered. He paused every time I sighed. He exhaled back. He didn't rush me, didn't leave. By the time we reached the gate, the sun was dipping low, the sky blushed orange and purple above us, the barn outlined in soft gold, and I was crying again, not from pain, but from something else, something I couldn't name. I leaned against the fence and looked at him. "You waited for me," I said. He blinked. "You came after me when I fell." Another blink. "You never left." Stillness, and then, he stepped forward, pressed his nose gently to my chest, and just stood there, heart to heart, breath to breath, and in that moment, I understood something. This wasn't just loyalty. It wasn't just memory or instinct or bond. It was choice. Zephyr had chosen me, over and over again, even when I didn't choose myself. That night, I didn't sleep in the house. I brought a blanket and laid it out in the barn. Zephyr curled beside me, and I rested against his flank like I used to when I was a girl who didn't know how to cry yet. The stars blinked above the broken roof beams, and I whispered, "I think I'm supposed to stay." The words scared me, but he didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't need to. He already knew. Nobody was around, except my horse, and what he did, that quiet refusal to abandon me when I needed him most, it changed everything. I had a choice to make. I hated it. It sat like a rock in my chest, pressing against every breath. I'd only come to Rivers Hollow for the weekend. 3 days. That was the plan, but the duffel bag still sat, untouched, by the front door. I hadn't even repacked. I couldn't bring myself to. Not after the woods. Not after the fall. Not after him. I limped through the old kitchen, now a little cleaner but still cluttered with ghosts. Grandpa's cane was still leaning by the back door. His old thermos still smelled faintly of coffee and peppermint oil. The silence had changed. It no longer echoed with absence. It hummed with memory. I turned my phone back on. 23 missed calls, mostly from my boss. 2 from Liam, my ex. 1 from the landlord reminding me that the rent was past due. The screen dimmed, and I didn't stop it, because in the stillness, I heard something else. Hoofbeats outside. I limped to the window, pulled the curtain back, and there he was. Zephyr is standing beneath the big oak tree in the moonlight, unmoving, head raised. Ears alert, watching the house, watching me. My throat caught. That he was waiting. That he knew, somehow, he knew I was doubting again. That I was slipping back into the version of myself who ran. Who fled when things got hard. Who forgot how to be still, and he wouldn't let me. Not again. I sat on the window bench, knees drawn to my chest. He didn't move for hours. The night deepened. A breeze picked up. Shadows stretched long and strange across the fields, but he stayed, sentinel. Witness. Anchor. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I fell asleep, curled against the glass, forehead resting on the cool pane, heart fluttering with unshed tears. When I woke, the sun had barely risen, the world was still blue and quiet, and he was still there. I stepped outside barefoot. Dew clung to the grass like morning secrets. He saw me instantly, didn't move but didn't even blink, just waited. I walked toward him, every step a question. He lowered his head as I approached, and I pressed my palm to his cheek, voice shaking. I don't know what to do. He breathed out, warm and steady, and I realized, maybe I didn't leave that day. I called the office and told them I wouldn't be back. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. Some endings don't come with neat punctuation, some beginnings don't need a full map. Instead, I threw open the barn doors. A storm had passed through me, and now, something was clearing. I started with the hayloft, cleaned out broken tools, nailed loose boards, repainted the faded sign over the stall that still read Zephyr in uneven letters I'd carved when I was 12. I mended fences, cut back fines, ordered supplies from the old ranch store. Every morning, he was waiting. Every night, he followed me back to the porch like he didn't trust the world to hold me without him, and maybe I didn't trust it either. The neighbors came by on day 5. A couple in their 60s who remembered Grandpa. They brought peach jam and questions. You staying long? I think so, I said. I think I am. The next day, I rode Zephyr bareback to no reins no saddle, just trust, through the field, through the wind, like we used to, and for the first time since before I left this place, I laughed. A week later, I sat on the porch with a notebook. I was writing again, not for work, not for deadlines. For me. Zephyr lay in the grass nearby, his massive frame curled like a dog's, dozing in the sun, and I knew, without any doubt, that he had saved me. Not in some dramatic, fairy tale way, but in a real, raw, soul-deep way. That he waited when no one else did. He saw me when I didn't want to be seen. He stayed when I would have let go, and somehow that changed everything. The locals started calling again, asking if I'd reopen the riding school, if I'd take boarders, if I'd teach their daughters how to ride like Grandpa taught me. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either, because something had shifted, not just in the barn, not just in the soil, but in me. It was the night of the harvest moon when I truly knew I was home. The stars spilled across the sky like broken glass. The fields were silver. The barn glowed faintly with lantern light, and Zephyr stood at the gate, waiting. I walked toward him. No fear, no doubt, just gravity. He stepped aside, not to block me this time, but to join me. We stood there together. No one else around, just a woman, and her horse, and the life they chose to stay and build together. The end.